Before we get started, please like and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from, and you can support the channel by clicking thanks or don't. I never planned to disappear during the holidays. Christmas had always been noisy for me, filled with crowded rooms, forced smiles and obligations that never felt warm. That year, I wanted silence. That was when I heard about the cabin. It came from a man named Daniel Harper, who worked the late shift with me at a distribution center outside of Portland. Daniel barely spoke most nights, but in early December, something in him cracked while snow tapped against the loading bay doors. He asked me a question that still makes my stomach tighten. He asked if I believed Christmas could trap a person. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke, but his face stayed serious. He told me there was a cabin far north, hidden deep in the woods, where Christmas never ended. He said the lights stayed on. The tree never lost its needles, and the fire never went out. He said people went there when they were tired of the world. Then he said something else. He said once, "Christmas chose you. It would not let you leave." Daniel told me he had been there once, years ago. He said the cabin felt like stepping into a memory that did not belong to anyone living. The air smelled like pine and cinnamon and something old. He said time behaved strangely inside, like it was circling the same moment again and again. When I asked him where it was, he shook his head. He told me some places could not be found unless they wanted to be. Before I could ask anything else, he clocked out early and left. That was the last night I ever saw Daniel. A week later, his locker was empty, and management said he had quit. No goodbye, no note, just gone. I tried to forget about him, but Christmas closed in around me. Every store window, every song, every smiling face made me feel like I was watching something through glass. By December 22nd, I packed my car and told no one where I was going. I drove north until the highways turned into narrow roads, and the roads turned into snow-covered paths that barely looked used. My phone lost signal. The radio dissolved into static. The forest grew thicker, darker, quieter. As the sun dipped below the trees, I saw a warm glow ahead. The cabin sat in a clearing like it had been waiting. Christmas lights lined the roof, glowing steadily without flicker. A wreath hung on the door, perfect and untouched. Snow fell gently around it. Yet there were no footprints, no tire tracks, no sign of life. The moment I stopped the engine, my car went silent, completely dead. The cold pushed me forward. I stepped toward the cabin and smelled it immediately. Pine cinnamon dust and something older, like a house that had been breathing for decades. The door opened without resistance. Inside the cabin was warm, too warm. A large Christmas tree filled the corner, heavy with ornaments that looked handmade and ancient. Wrapped gifts sat beneath it, each with a name written in careful ink. The fireplace crackled softly. A calendar hung on the wall, December 25th. I tried to turn the page, but it would not move. Every page beneath showed the same date. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, calm, familiar. A voice followed, cheerful and wrong. "Merry Christmas," it said. The voice echoed through the cabin long after the words were spoken. Merry Christmas. It sounded friendly, almost gentle, yet Something about it made my chest tighten. I stood frozen near the doorway, listening to the fire crackle and the soft hum of electricity running through unseen wires. The warmth felt unnatural, like the cabin was trying too hard to make me comfortable. I called out again, asking who was there. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the wooden walls. There was no immediate answer. After a few seconds, I convinced myself the voice had come from an old radio or a speaker hidden somewhere in the cabin. That explanation felt thin, but I clung to it. I took a slow step forward. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots, loud enough to make me flinch. The hallway stretched ahead, darker than the rest of the cabin, even though soft Christmas lights lined its ceiling. They glowed steadily without flicker, casting shadows that did not quite match the objects around them. As I walked, I noticed the walls were covered in framed photographs. At first, they looked like ordinary family pictures, smiling. Couples, children in winter coats, people gathered around a Christmas tree. But as I moved closer, unease crept over me. The faces were too familiar. I stopped in front of one frame and felt my stomach drop. The man in the photo looked exactly like Daniel. He stood beside a woman I did not recognize. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, both of them smiling as snow fell around them. A small handwritten label beneath the frame read, December 25th. I moved to the next photo. Daniel, again older this time, standing alone in front of the same cabin, holding a mug in both hands. The same date was written below. Every picture showed a different person, but the cabin was always there. The tree, the lights, the wreath, all unchanged. The dates never varied. December 25th. My breathing grew shallow. I felt watched, though the hallway was empty. When I turned around, I saw that the door behind me was no longer visible. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching farther than it should have. I hurried forward, panic pushing me faster. At the end of the hall was a small living room, separate from the main area. A couch faced an old television that flickered with static. Stockings hung neatly above another fireplace, smaller than the first. The television suddenly cleared. An image appeared grainy and washed in dull color. It showed the inside of the same cabin, but from a different angle. The room on the screen looked identical except for one detail. I was standing in it. I watched myself from behind, frozen near the couch. The image lagged slightly, like a delayed broadcast. I raised my hand slowly, and on the screen, the version of me followed a second later. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The television cut to black. Behind me, footsteps sounded again. I spun around. A man stood in the doorway leading to the kitchen. He looked ordinary, middle-aged, wearing a red sweater dusted with snow. His smile was warm and practiced the kind people wore at holiday gatherings. He introduced himself as Michael. He said he had been keeping the cabin ready for guests. He spoke calmly, as if nothing about the situation was strange. When I demanded to know how he had shown up without a car, he simply laughed. He told me the cabin provided what was needed. I asked him about the photographs. His smile faded for the first time. He said everyone who came here stayed for Christmas, some longer than others. I asked if Daniel was still here. Michael looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. He said Daniel was resting. Before I could ask where, Michael turned toward the hallway and asked me to follow him. Something in his tone made it clear that refusing was not an option. We walked past doors that were now closed, though I did not remember seeing them before. From behind one of them, I heard faint humming, a Christmas carol sung slowly off-key. Michael stopped in front of the last door. He told me the cabin did not like to be alone. He said Christmas was meant to be shared. Then he opened the door. Inside was a small bedroom decorated exactly like a child might imagine Christmas to be. Garland covered the walls. Lights blinked softly, and a tiny tree sat on a table. On the bed lay Daniel. His eyes were open. He looked at me and tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped his mouth. He said it was always Christmas here, and then the lights went out. When the lights went out, the cabin did not fall silent. That was what frightened me the most. I could still hear the fire breathing somewhere in the darkness. I could hear the faint electrical hum of the Christmas lights. Even though none of them were visible, it was as if the cabin itself refused to sleep. I called Daniel's name and my voice cracked. There was no answer. I took a step forward and nearly tripped over the edge of the bed. My hands shook as I reached out and touched the mattress. It was warm, too warm. The lights snapped back on all at once. Not gradually, not flickering, just instant brightness that made my eyes sting. Daniel was gone. The bed was perfectly made, as if no one had been lying there at all. The tiny Christmas tree on the table blinked cheerfully, as if mocking me. Michael stood in the doorway again, smiling softly. He said the cabin did not like scenes. He said it preferred calm gratitude and celebration. I demanded to know where Daniel was. Michael told me Daniel had been here a long time. He said some people arrived broken, and the cabin tried to fix them. Others arrived curious, and the cabin taught them patience. I asked what happened when the cabin was finished with someone. Michael did not answer. He gestured for me to follow him back down the hallway. The photographs were gone. The walls were bare wood, now smooth and unmarked. I knew what I had seen earlier, but the emptiness made me question my own memory. The hallway felt shorter this time, though I was certain it had stretched before. We returned to the main living area. The wrapped gifts beneath the tree caught my attention. There were more of them now. I could have sworn there had only been a handful before. Each one had a name written neatly on the tag. One of them had my name. I asked Michael how long he had been here. He said he stopped counting years a long time ago. He told me the cabin existed outside of time. He said Christmas was a moment people wanted to hold on to, and the cabin simply honored that wish. I tried to reach the front door. It would not open. The handle turned easily, but the door did not move. The windows showed only darkness now. No forest, no snow, just black nothingness. Like a curtain had been drawn around the cabin. Michael told me to sit down. Against every instinct, I obeyed. The couch felt softer than it should have, as if it were slowly molding itself around me. Michael sat across from me and folded his hands. He explained that the cabin appeared when people were most vulnerable, when they were tired, lonely, grieving, or afraid of what waited for them after the holidays ended. He said the cabin offered rest, warmth, and familiarity. In return, it asked only that they stay. I asked what happened to those who tried to leave. Michael looked toward the fireplace. In the flames, I thought I saw shapes moving, twisting like figures reaching upward. He said the cabin corrected resistance. He said it reminded people why they came. The clock above the fireplace caught my eye. Its hands were spinning now, not wildly, but looping over the same few minutes again and again. My head started to ache as I watched it. Suddenly, music filled the room. A Christmas carol played softly from nowhere and everywhere at once. I recognized the tune from my childhood. My mother's voice echoed faintly beneath it, though she had been dead for years. Tears welled before I could stop them. Michael watched quietly. I realized then that the cabin was not just holding time still. It was feeding on memory. It was building a perfect Christmas for each person who entered, shaped by what they missed most. I stood up, forcing my legs to move. I told Michael I would not stay. I told him I did not care how perfect Christmas was if it was not real. The temperature dropped instantly. Frost crept along the edges of the windows. The fire dimmed. Michael sighed like a disappointed host. He said everyone said that at first. The floor beneath me shifted. The walls seemed to lean inward. The cabin groaned like an old ship under pressure. I ran toward the hallway, but it twisted, splitting into two identical paths. From both directions, I heard voices calling my name, softly, lovingly. Behind me, Michael spoke again. He said Christmas was not finished with me yet. The lights went out once more, and this time I was not alone in the dark. I woke up on the living room couch with the fire crackling gently and soft Christmas music playing somewhere nearby. For a few seconds, I convinced myself everything that had happened was a dream brought on by exhaustion and cold. The cabin looked peaceful again. Warm lights glowed. Snow drifted lazily past the windows. The smell of pine filled the air. Then I tried to sit up. My body felt heavy, as if I had been sleeping for days. The couch released me slowly, like it was reluctant to let go. When I stood, my legs trembled. The clock above the fireplace caught my attention immediately. December 25th. The hands moved normally now, ticking forward second by second. Relief washed over me until I noticed something wrong. The time read 8:15 in the morning. I was sure it had been night when the lights went out. Michael stood near the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He greeted me cheerfully and wished me a Merry Christmas, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I asked him how long I had been unconscious. He told me I had slept well and that the cabin always made sure guests were rested. I asked about Daniel. Michael paused, just long enough for fear to return. He said Daniel was enjoying Christmas elsewhere in the cabin. He suggested I not worry about him. Christmas was about the present moment, he said, not the past. Something about that sentence felt rehearsed. I walked toward the windows. Outside, the forest looked brighter than before, almost artificial. The snow sparkled too evenly. The trees stood motionless like decorations. When I pressed my hand against the glass, it felt warm. I asked Michael if it was safe to go outside. He smiled and said the weather was perfect. The front door opened easily this time. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and something metallic. I stepped outside and immediately felt disoriented. The clearing looked larger than it had the night before. The cabin stood behind me, but when I turned back toward the forest, the trees seemed closer, forming a wall. I walked a few steps into the snow. It crunched beneath my boots, but left shallow prints that faded within seconds. Panic tightened my chest. I turned and hurried back to the cabin. The door was gone. Where the entrance should have been, there was only smooth wooden wall decorated with garland and lights. I ran my hands over it, desperately searching for a seam. Nothing. The cabin had turned its back on me. Michael appeared beside me without warning. He told me not to be upset. He said the cabin sometimes changed its shape to protect guests from leaving too soon. He guided me back inside through a side door I did not remember seeing before. Inside, everything felt slightly different. Furniture had shifted. Decorations were more elaborate. There were more stockings, more ornaments, more lights. The cabin felt fuller, as if preparing for a celebration. I noticed voices then, faint laughter drifting through the walls. I asked Michael who else was here. He said families arrived every year. He said Christmas brought people together. He led me into the dining room. A long table stretched farther than the room should allow, covered in plates, food, and candles. At the head of the table sat an empty chair. Michael placed his hand on it and told me it was reserved for me. I backed away, shaking my head. I told him I would not sit. I told him I wanted to leave. The laughter stopped instantly. The lights dimmed. Michael looked tired for the first time. He said the cabin did not appreciate rejection. He said everyone eventually accepted their place because fighting only made the holiday longer. I asked him what he meant by longer. He gestured toward the calendar on the wall. There were dozens of them now, all set to the same date, December 25th. He told me time here did not move forward. It expanded. Every Christmas ever wanted lived here, layered on top of one another. He said the cabin remembered every guest, every song, every meal, every tear. I realized then that the cabin was not a place. It was an accumulation. That night, the celebration began. Bells rang somewhere in the walls. Voices sang carols from unseen rooms. I locked myself in a small bathroom, shaking, listening to footsteps pass outside the door again and again. When I finally dared to open it, the hallway was full of people. Men, women, children, all dressed in old winter clothes, smiling politely as they passed me. Their eyes were hollow. None of them acknowledged me. At the end of the hall, I saw Daniel standing among them. He looked healthier than I had ever seen him. Younger, happier. He caught my eye and his smile faltered just for a second. Then the bells rang louder and Christmas dinner was announced. Christmas dinner began without warning. One moment, the hallway was crowded with silent, smiling faces, and the next, bells chimed softly, and everyone turned in unison toward the dining room. Their movements were slow, synchronized, like actors who had rehearsed the same scene too many times. I was carried along by the flow, unable to fight the pressure of bodies around me. The dining room glowed with candlelight. The long table was now fully occupied. Families sat together, laughing quietly, passing dishes that steamed. Despite the room room already being warm. The food smelled incredible. Roasted meat, baked bread, sweet spices that made my mouth water against my will. At the head of the table, the empty chair waited. Michael stood behind it and gestured for me to sit. Every instinct screamed not to. I shook my head, stepping back, but the people behind me did not stop moving. Hands pressed gently but firmly against my shoulders, guiding me forward. Their smiles never faltered. I sat. The moment I did, the room exhaled. Conversation swelled instantly, filling the air with warmth and noise. Someone placed a plate in front of me, already full. A glass of something dark and sweet appeared at my side. When I looked down, I saw my name etched faintly into the rim. I asked who these people were. No one answered directly. They spoke over me about traditions, weather, childhood memories, all the things people said during holiday dinners. Their voices overlapped until it felt impossible to separate one from another. Across the table, Daniel sat with a woman and a young boy. He laughed easily, his eyes bright. When I called his name, he froze. Slowly, he looked at me. Recognition flickered, then vanished, replaced by a polite, distant smile. Michael raised a glass and wished everyone a Merry Christmas. Everyone echoed the words together. As they drank, the temperature in the room shifted. The candles burned brighter, casting longer shadows. I noticed then that the shadows did not match the people who cast them. Some were taller, thinner, twisted in impossible ways. I pushed back from the table and stood. The room went quiet instantly. Michael looked at me with disappointment rather than anger. He said Christmas dinner was important. He said refusing to participate made the cabin uneasy. I asked him what would happen if I kept refusing. Michael gestured toward the far end of the room. The wall there shimmered like heat rising from pavement. Slowly, it became transparent, revealing another dining table beyond it. That table was empty except for a single figure slumped in a chair. I recognized the shape even before I saw his face. It was Daniel, older, thinner eyes, hollow, staring at nothing. The cheerful version of him at the table vanished, replaced by this one. I realized then that what sat beside me was not Daniel, but a memory shaped to fit the moment. Michael said the cabin preserved people the way they wished to be remembered. He said memories were kinder than reality. The wall solidified again. The other Daniel was gone. I felt sick. Michael told me everyone here had multiple versions. He said Christmas layered itself until the originals faded beneath celebration. He said resisting only slowed the process. I noticed then that my own reflection shimmered faintly in the polished surface of the table. For a split second, I saw myself smiling, eating, laughing like everyone else. I slammed my hand down, breaking the illusion. The candles flickered violently. Plates rattled. The people around me began to hum softly a carol I did not recognize. Their voices were low, vibrating through the floor into my bones. Michael warned me that the cabin was patient, but not forgiving. He said every guest eventually took their place, either willingly or by forgetting why they wanted to leave. The humming grew louder. The walls pulsed gently like something breathing. I felt memories stirring, images of past Christmases, good and bad, surfacing uninvited. The cabin was reaching inside me, searching for something to hold. I ran. I bolted from the dining room, ignoring the shouting behind me. The hallway warped, stretching impossibly long. Doors appeared where none had been before. From behind them came laughter, crying arguments, all the sounds of holidays past. I ducked into the first door I saw and slammed it shut. Inside was a small room filled with wrapped gifts stacked floor to ceiling. Each box was labeled with a year, past, present, future. One box sat open on the floor. Inside was a photograph of me sitting at the head of the table, smiling. The date on the back read December 25th. I screamed. Somewhere in the cabin, bells rang again, softer this time. Christmas was not finished with me. I stayed in the gift room longer than I should have. The bells faded into the distance, but the silence that followed felt heavier than noise. The stacks of presents towered over me, leaning slightly as if listening. Each box was wrapped carefully, paper crisp corners, perfect bows, untouched by time. Years were written on every tag in neat ink, stretching backward far beyond my birth, and forward far beyond what I could imagine. I opened another box. Inside was a memory that was not mine. A photograph showed a family I did not recognize gathered around a Christmas tree laughing. Their faces were frozen in joy, yet something about their eyes felt wrong. Empty like mannequins dressed as people. On the back was written December 25th, 1978. When I dropped the photo, my hands were shaking. The cabin was not just collecting people, it was collecting Christmases. I heard footsteps outside the door, slow, deliberate. I held my breath. The handle turned once, then stopped. A soft voice spoke my name, the same tone my mother used when I was a child, and afraid of the dark. I pressed my hands over my ears, refusing to answer. The footsteps moved on. When I finally opened the door, the hallway looked different again. The walls were covered in tinsel and garland, thicker than before, almost suffocating. The air felt sweet, heavy, like breathing through fabric. Somewhere nearby, a music box played a warped version of a familiar carol. I moved carefully, trying to memorize turns. Knowing the cabin liked to rearrange itself, I noticed small things out of place. A picture frame half embedded in the wall, a door that breathed slightly as if flexing. The cabin was alive. I found the kitchen empty. Food from dinner still sat on the counters, steaming gently, as if no time had passed. I grabbed a knife more for comfort than defense. The blade felt warm. A noise came from the pantry. I opened it slowly. Inside stood a woman about my age, wearing a red sweater identical to mine. Her hair, her face, her eyes were mine. She smiled nervously, the same way I did when I did not know what to say. She told me she had been here longer. She said she was me. I stumbled back, heart racing. She explained in a rush that the cabin made copies built from memories and wishes. She said she was the version that accepted Christmas, the version that stopped fighting. I asked her how long she had been here. She hesitated, then said she did not know because time did not behave here. She said once you accepted, the cabin split, you keeping the obedient part and discarding the rest. She begged me to stop resisting. She said it hurt less if you let it happen. Footsteps approached again, heavier this time. Michael's voice called out cheerfully, asking if everything was all right. The other me flinched. She whispered that he was not the first caretaker. She said the cabin changed them too. She told me there was a way out, but only before Christmas was complete. I asked what that meant. She said when everyone sat willingly at the table, Christmas would be finished forever. Michael reached the kitchen doorway. His smile tightened when he saw us together. He told the other me it was time to rest. She looked at me with something like pity, then stepped past him, willingly disappearing down the hallway. Michael turned to me and sighed. He said I was making things complicated. He said the cabin had already invested a lot in me. He said my memories were rich, full of longing and regret, perfect for the season. I told him I would burn the place down if I had to. For the first time, Michael laughed nervously. He told me fire had been tried. He said storms had been tried. He said running had been tried. Christmas always won. The lights dimmed again. The music grew louder. I felt the cabin tighten around me like a fist. The knife in my hand vibrated gently, humming in time with the carol. Michael leaned close and whispered that I was running out of time because Christmas was almost finished, and the cabin was deciding which version of me would stay. After Michael left the kitchen, I stood there shaking, listening to the warped carol echo through the walls. The knife in my hand finally stopped vibrating, but the warmth remained, as if it had absorbed the heat of my fear. I knew then that hiding was no longer an option. The cabin knew where I was at all times. Running only entertained it. I needed to understand the rules. I moved through the corridors slowly, forcing myself not to panic when the layout shifted. The cabin no longer bothered hiding its changes. Hallways curved where they should have been straight. Doors appeared, then vanished when I looked away. Christmas lights pulsed faintly like veins beneath the wooden walls. I followed the sound of the music box deeper into the structure. It led me to a staircase I had not seen before, descending into darkness. Cold air drifted up, carrying the smell of damp wood and old ash. Unlike the rest of the cabin, this place did not smell like Christmas. I went down. The basement was large, far larger than the footprint of the cabin should allow. Wooden beams stretched upward, disappearing into shadow. The floor was dirt packed hard by countless footsteps. Strings of unlit Christmas lights hung uselessly along the walls, as if decoration had failed here. In the center of the basement stood a massive tree trunk embedded into the ground, its bark pale and cracked. It was not a Christmas tree, but something older, stripped bare and scarred. Symbols were carved into it, layered over one another so deeply that the wood looked wounded. This was the heart of the cabin. I felt it the moment I stepped closer. The air vibrated with a low hum identical to the one that filled the rooms above. I realized then that the cabin was not built around the tree. It had grown from it. I saw names carved into the trunk, thousands of them. Some deep, some barely visible. Dates followed each name, always the same. December 25th. At the base of the tree lay offerings, ornaments cracked with age, pieces of ribbon, burned candles, photographs, letters and bones, small and large alike. I recognized handwriting on one of the letters. Daniel. His message was brief, written with a shaking hand. He begged whoever found it not to accept the cabin. He said, Christmas fed the tree, and the tree fed the cabin. He said every celebration strengthened it. Footsteps echoed behind me. Michael stood at the top of the stairs, watching. His cheerful mask was gone. He looked older here, worn thin, like a man stretched across too many years. He told me this place was not meant for guests. He said the basement was where caretakers learned the truth. I asked him how long he had served the cabin. He told me he had arrived as a child with his family. He said the cabin took his parents first, wrapping them in perfect memories until they forgot themselves. He said someone had to stay behind to keep Christmas going. I asked him why. Michael touched the tree gently. He said the tree was hunger given form. He said it grew stronger on joy, longing, and repetition. Christmas was the perfect meal because people always wanted it back. He said if Christmas ever ended, the cabin would die, and so would everyone inside it. I asked him if there was a way to stop it. Michael hesitated. He said there was once a fire strong enough to scar the tree, but it had not been enough. He said the cabin learned from pain. It adapted. I looked again at the carvings, the offerings, the bones. The tree was not immortal. It remembered damage. I backed toward the stairs, clutching the knife. Michael did not stop me. He said resistance made the season longer. He said Christmas would keep repeating until I broke or became useful. As I climbed the steps, the music above swelled louder, drowning out my thoughts. When I reached the top, the basement door slammed shut behind me on its own. The hallway beyond was packed with people again, all moving toward the dining room. The final dinner was beginning, and I finally understood what the cabin needed from me. Not my body, my choice. The final dinner pulled everyone toward it like gravity. I moved with the crowd, not because I wanted to, but because resisting here meant being torn apart slowly by memory and ritual. The hallway narrowed as we walked, walls pressing close, warm and humming. Christmas lights flickered faster now, blinking in a frantic rhythm like a pulse racing toward collapse. The dining room doors stood wide open. Inside, the table was set more elaborately than before. The candles were taller, the plates finer, the decorations excessive, almost desperate. The cabin was preparing for completion. I felt it in the air, thick with sweetness and heat. Every chair was filled except one, mine. Michael stood at the head of the table again, but he no longer looked calm. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his smile twitched. He welcomed everyone with practiced cheer, but his eyes kept darting toward me. He knew I understood now. I did not sit. The room waited. A pressure built in my ears like altitude change. The guests turned slowly in their chairs, all eyes fixing on me. Their smiles stretched wider, straining at the edges. The shadows behind them twisted taller than their bodies. Michael asked me gently to take my place. I asked him what happened when Christmas finished. The music faltered. For the first time since I arrived, the carol broke mid-note. Michael hesitated, then told the truth. He said when Christmas was complete, the cabin would seal itself. No more guests, no more caretakers, only those inside preserved forever in their perfect moment. I asked what happened to the tree. Michael swallowed. He said the tree would sleep until it was hungry again, until someone wished hard enough for Christmas to never end. I looked around the table, at the people frozen in anticipation, at Daniel, who would not meet my eyes, at the empty chair waiting for me like a mouth. I thought of the basement, of the scars in the tree, of the knife still warm in my pocket. I told Michael I chose to end Christmas. The reaction was immediate. The lights shattered, plunging the room into chaos. Candles flared wildly, wax spilling across the table. The guests screamed. For the first time, their voices layered with decades of grief and joy collapsing together. The walls groaned and bent inward. Michael shouted that I did not understand. He said ending Christmas meant ending them. He said their memories would unravel, their identities would dissolve. I told him memories were not life. I ran. The cabin fought me openly now. Floors buckled beneath my feet. Hallways collapsed into dead ends, then reopened behind me. Doors slammed shut, trapping screams inside. I followed the vibration in my pocket, the knife pulling me downward toward the basement. The stairs shook violently as I descended. The basement glowed faintly, the tree pulsing with sickly light. The hum here was deafening, drowning out my thoughts. I rushed forward, ignoring the heat radiating from the trunk. The carvings burned beneath my fingers as I pressed my hand against them. Names screamed silently beneath my touch. I raised the knife. The tree reacted instantly. Roots burst from the dirt, wrapping around my legs, burning cold. Images flooded my mind. Christmas mornings, laughter, warmth, belonging, everything I had ever missed. The cabin was showing me what I would lose. I screamed and drove the knife into the trunk. The sound was unbearable, like wood and flesh tearing at once. Sap poured out dark and steaming, filling the air with the smell of rot and pine. The lights overhead exploded, showering sparks. The tree thrashed violently. Roots cracked and recoiled. The carving split apart. I stabbed again and again, ignoring the pain as the knife grew hotter in my hand. Above me, the cabin screamed. Boards snapped. Glass shattered. The endless carol warped into a distorted wail. I felt the cabin loosening its grip, reality slipping like a knot coming undone. Michael appeared at the base of the stairs, screaming for me to stop, his face twisted with fear and grief. He begged me not to take Christmas from him. I told him Christmas was already gone. With a final strike, the knife broke off, embedded deep in the trunk. The tree convulsed, then fell silent. The light dimmed to nothing. For a moment there was only darkness. Then the basement door burst open and cold air rushed in, real cold, sharp and clean. The hum was gone. Christmas was ending. I expected the cabin to collapse immediately after the tree went silent. I expected fire or darkness or nothing at all. Instead, there was a pause, so complete. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I stood in the basement, surrounded by broken roots and splintered wood, my ears ringing, my lungs burning with cold air that tasted real for the first time since I arrived. Then the screaming started. It did not come from one place. It came from everywhere at once. From the walls, the floors, the ceiling, the stairwell. Voices overlapped, crying, shouting, begging, laughing, all tangled tangled together. The cabin was emptying itself of decades of trapped Christmases, and the sound of it was unbearable. I ran up the stairs as the basement behind me began to rot. The tree trunk shriveled rapidly, its bark collapsing inward like burned paper. The symbols carved into it bled sap that steamed and evaporated before it hit the ground. With every step upward, the screaming grew louder. The hallway above was unrecognizable. Garland hung in tatters. Christmas lights sparked and died, leaving trails of smoke. The walls sagged as if the cabin were melting. People stumbled through the chaos, clutching their heads, screaming names, memories, years that no longer made sense to them. I saw a woman collapse to her knees, sobbing as she aged rapidly in seconds, hair turning gray, skin sagging under the weight of stolen time. A man nearby screamed as his body flickered between child and adult, unable to decide which version was real. Christmas was unraveling. I pushed through the crowd toward the front door, or where I hoped it would be. The floor split beneath my feet, revealing darkness below. Cold wind tore through the cabin, extinguishing candles and ripping decorations from the walls. Michael appeared ahead of me, staggering like a man waking from a long dream. The cheer was gone completely now. He looked terrified, smaller than before. He shouted my name barely audible over the chaos and begged me to help him. I told him I already had. He grabbed my arm, desperation in his grip. He said he could not survive outside Christmas. He said he did not know who he was without it. He begged me to choose him to stay, to let the cabin rebuild around him. I pulled free. I told him the cabin had already chosen him once, and it had ruined him. Michael screamed as the floor beneath him collapsed. He fell into darkness, still calling Merry Christmas over and over until his voice was swallowed completely. I reached the front of the cabin just as the walls began to tear themselves apart. The door reappeared solid, real wood splintered and old. I threw my weight against it and it burst open. Snow blasted into my face, real snow, sharp and biting. I stumbled outside, collapsing into the clearing, gasping. Behind me, the cabin groaned like a dying animal. The windows shattered one by one. The roof caved inward. I crawled away as the structure folded in on itself, boards, snapping beams cracking until nothing remained but a heap of broken wood, sinking into the snow. Then it was over. Silence returned. The forest looked different now, alive. The trees swayed in the wind, branches creaking naturally. My footprints stayed in the snow. The sky was pale with early morning light. I lay there shaking for a long time before I could stand. When I finally did, I realized I was not alone. People emerged slowly from the tree line, dazed, confused, frightened. Men, women, children, all blinking at the sky like prisoners released from underground. Some cried, some laughed hysterically, some simply stared at their hands like they did not recognize them. Daniel was among them. He looked older now, truly older, but awake. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. He thanked me again and again, voice breaking. He said he remembered everything now. The cabin, the copies, the years lost. We did not stay long. As the sun climbed higher, the clearing began to sink where the cabin had stood, as if the ground itself were swallowing the remains. None of us wanted to be there when it finished. We walked together until we found a road. Cars eventually. Police questions none of us could properly answer. They said the cabin had never existed, but sometimes at night when Christmas approaches, I hear bells faint and distant carried on the wind, and I wonder if the tree is truly dead or just waiting, because some people still wish for Christmas to never end. We were taken to a small town hospital just after sunrise. Police cars lined the road, and questions came quickly, but none of us could answer them in a way that made sense. We spoke about a cabin that no longer existed, about years lost inside a single night, about Christmas that refused to move forward. The officers exchanged looks and wrote things down that did not match our words. Doctors said we were suffering from exposure shock and shared delusions brought on by hypothermia. They kept us separated for observation. I did not argue. I was too tired to fight reality again. Daniel was placed in the room across from mine. Through the small window in the door, I watched him sit on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. He looked fragile, like someone who had just woken up from a long coma. Every so often, he would flinch, as if hearing music no one else could hear. The first night I slept without dreaming. That scared me more than anything else. When I woke the next morning, a small paper calendar hung on the wall beside my bed. I stared at it for a long time before forcing myself to look at the date, December 26th. Relief washed over me so suddenly that I started to cry. The nurse assumed it was exhaustion and patted my shoulder gently. I let her believe that over the next few days, most of us were released. Some went back to families who thought they had been missing for hours, not years. Others had no one waiting. Time had moved on without them, and the world had not noticed they were gone. Daniel and I talked quietly when the staff allowed it. He told me fragments of what he remembered, years of perfect Christmases layered one over another until nothing else existed. He said he remembered agreeing to stay. He remembered smiling until it felt natural. He remembered forgetting why he had ever been afraid. He asked me why I had not forgotten. I told him I almost did. When I was discharged, I returned home alone. My apartment felt wrong, stripped bare of decorations that had once comforted me. I avoided Christmas music. I avoided lights. I avoided anything that might remind me of warmth that was not real. For a while, life returned to something close to normal. Then December came again. At first, it was small things. A song on the radio repeating twice in a row. A store window that seemed too familiar. A wreath on my door I did not remember hanging. I told myself I was paranoid until the dreams started. I dreamed of the basement tree, scarred but alive, its roots stretching far beyond the cabin, spreading beneath town, cities, highways. I dreamed of ornaments buried in soil and snow, letters pressed into bark, waiting to be read again. One night I woke to the sound of bells. They were faint, distant, but unmistakable. I sat up, heart racing, listening. The sound drifted through the open window, carried on cold winter air. Outside, snow had begun to fall. I checked the calendar. December 25th. I tore it down, hands shaking. Beneath it was another page. December 25th. I left the apartment that night and walked until dawn. When I returned, the calendar showed the correct date again. The bells were gone, but I knew. I began to notice others too. People who lingered too long in holiday aisles. People who smiled too wide when carols played. People who spoke about wishing they could stay in Christmas forever. The cabin was gone. The tree was not. It no longer needed walls or caretakers. It lived in memory, in longing, in repetition. Every time someone wished for Christmas to never end, something answered. I still hear bells some nights, and when I do, I make a choice all over again. I let Christmas end, even when it hurts. I tried to warn people without sounding insane. That turned out to be harder than surviving the cabin itself. You cannot tell someone that Christmas can grow roots, or that a wish can become a place without watching their eyes change. So I learned to speak carefully. I learned to listen instead. I took a temporary job that required travel. Small towns, remote highways, quiet places where winter felt heavier and traditions clung tighter. I told myself I was just moving on. In truth, I was watching. The signs were subtle at first. A diner that kept its Christmas decorations up well into February. A gas station radio stuck on the same holiday station, no matter how often the dial was turned. A family who insisted they celebrated Christmas every week because it made them feel safe. I began to feel the hum again in those places. Not loud, not overwhelming, just a vibration under the skin, like standing too close to an electrical line. I met others like me, not survivors from the cabin, but people who felt the pull. They described dreams of warm lights in cold woods, of endless dinners, of never having to say goodbye. They laughed when they talked about it, but their laughter sounded forced, as if something else were listening. In Montana, a woman told me she had found a small, decorated shed behind her property that she did not remember building. She said every time she went inside, she lost track of time. She asked me if that was normal. I told her to burn it. She never called me back. In Michigan, a man showed me photographs on his phone of a Christmas party that seemed to last for days. The people in the pictures smiled too widely. The decorations never changed. The dates on the photos were all the same. December 25th. I told him to leave town. He said he could not. He said his family was finally happy. That was how the tree worked now. It did not need a single cabin. It spread through desire, through tradition, through repetition. Every place that refused to let Christmas end became fertile ground. I started documenting everything. Names, locations, dates, patterns. I noticed the same conditions again and again. Isolation, grief, long winters, communities built around routine. Christmas was strongest where people feared change. Sometimes at night I dreamed of Daniel. In the dreams, he stood in the forest, calling my name. He looked peaceful, but distant, like someone waving from the far side of a frozen lake. I would wake with the hum in my ears and the smell of pine in my nose. I stopped sleeping near Christmas on December 24th of the following year. The bells returned louder than before. They rang from everywhere. Churches, radios, wine chimes, even car alarms seemed to fall into rhythm. I drove through the night following the sound. It led me to a town that was not on my map. Every building was decorated, every window glowed. People walked the streets, smiling, greeting one another like lifelong friends. Snow fell gently without wind. It was beautiful, too beautiful. At the center of town stood a large tree decorated with ornaments that looked handmade and ancient. No sign explained where it came from. No one questioned it. I parked and watched from my car, heart pounding. The hum was overwhelming here, pressing against my skull. I saw a familiar figure near the tree. Michael, he looked younger than when I last saw him, healthier. His eyes met mine across the square, and he smiled with recognition. He did not come closer. He did not need to. I realized then that ending one Christmas had not destroyed the tree. It had only taught it to grow differently, to spread thinner, wider, quieter. I drove away before dawn. Now I move constantly. I interrupt traditions. I question routines. I remind people that endings are necessary even when they hurt. Most of them laugh. Some of them listen. When the bells ring, I choose again and again to walk away from the warmth, to let the lights go dark, to let Christmas end, because somewhere out there roots are searching, and as long as people wish hard enough, the tree will keep growing. I stopped pretending I was just a witness. By the second year after the cabin fell, I understood what I really was. I was a counterweight. Wherever the pull of Christmas grew too strong, I felt it first, like pressure behind the eyes, like a headache that never quite became pain. The tree had not chosen me by accident. It had marked me. I began keeping strict routines of my own. I marked every day on paper calendars. Never digital ones. I tore off each page at midnight, no matter where I was. I forced endings even when they felt unnecessary. When December ended, I threw away decorations without ceremony. I did not store them. I did not look back. Most people did not understand why that mattered. The towns where Christmas lingered grew harder to approach. The hum there was stronger, layered with voices, laughter songs, played out of season. I could feel the roots underfoot now, not physically, but emotionally tugging at old grief and unspoken wishes. The tree fed on the same things everywhere: loss, regret, fear of what came next. In one town in northern Minnesota, I arrived just before Christmas and found the school still holding rehearsals for a holiday pageant scheduled every night. Parents said the children begged to perform again and again because it made them happy. No one questioned why the same script never changed. I stayed long enough to watch. The children sang perfectly, too perfectly. Their smiles never faded, even when their voices grew hoarse. Some parents cried watching, believing they were witnessing something pure. I felt the hum swell until my vision blurred. Behind the stage, I found a small pine sapling growing through the floorboards. It was decorated with tiny paper ornaments, each bearing a child's name. The soil around it was warm. I did not wait for permission. That night, I pulled the sapling out, roots and all. The ground bled sap dark and sticky. The next morning, the town woke to silence. Parents complained that their children refused to sing. The pageant was canceled. People were angry. No one thanked me. In Colorado, I found a church that rang its bells every hour, day and night, from December 1st onward. The congregation said it brought them comfort. The pastor said the bells kept evil away. I knew better. I climbed the tower at night and cut the ropes. The bells crashed to the floor, shattering. The hum faded instantly. The next day, people said the church felt empty. Attendance dropped. They blamed vandals. Every time I acted, the tree responded. Dreams grew more vivid. The bells followed me farther. Sometimes I saw Michael again, watching from crowds, from reflections, from the edges of forests. He never spoke. I realized then that the caretakers were not gone. They were seeds. On the third Christmas after the cabin, I failed. I arrived too late. A small mountain town had declared a year-long Christmas festival to revive tourism. Decorations covered every surface. Artificial snow machines ran constantly. People smiled with the same strained joy I remembered from the cabin. At the center of town stood a massive tree, not ancient, but growing fast, its branches thick and heavy with ornaments. The hum there was overwhelming. I tried to stop it. I smashed decorations. I warned people. I was restrained and arrested. They said I was dangerous. That night from the jail window, I watched the festival continue. The bells rang. The lights burned bright. The tree grew. I felt something settle into place deep beneath the town. By the time I was released, it was too late. People had stopped leaving. Winter stretched on. The calendar in my pocket stayed the same, no matter how many times I checked it. December 25th, I left before it finished. Now I travel with urgency I did not have before. I know I cannot stop every route. I know the tree only needs a few places to thrive. I no longer ask whether Christmas should end. I ask where it must end next, because the tree is learning, and so am I. I learned the hardest lesson in a place where I thought I could still win. The town was small, even by winter standards, tucked between mountains, where the sun disappeared early and did not return until late morning. Christmas had always been important there, but never dangerous. I had passed through once before without feeling the hum. That was why I chose it. I arrived 3 days before Christmas. Snow lined the streets in neat piles, and every house glowed softly with lights. It felt ordinary, comforting. I almost turned around. The first warning came from the calendar in my motel room. December 22nd. I tore the page away the next night at midnight, like always. When I woke the following morning, the calendar read, December 22nd again. My chest tightened, but I told myself it was a printing error. I tore the page away a second time. It came back. I walked outside and listened. No bells, no carols, no hum. The tree was learning to hide. I spent the day talking to locals. Everyone spoke about Christmas with unusual intensity, not excitement, relief. They said the holidays made the town feel complete. They said arguments stopped. People stayed, no one left anymore. That night I followed the feeling beneath my feet. It led me to the edge of town where an old community center stood dark and locked. Decorations covered its exterior, but none were lit. The door was unlocked. Inside, I found a Christmas market frozen in preparation. Stalls stood empty, garlands, half-hung boxes of ornaments unopened. In the center of the hall stood a tree larger than any I had seen outside a forest. Its branches scraped the ceiling. Its needles were dark, almost black. This tree was different. It did not hum. It waited. I approached slowly, feeling the weight of every past failure press against me. I saw offerings beneath the branches. Letters, photographs, wedding rings, baby shoes. The price was rising. I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel stood in the doorway. He looked exhausted, pale lines etched deep into his face. He told me he had followed the pull here too. He said he felt responsible for what was happening now. He said he wanted to help end it. I told him to leave. He refused. We argued quietly beneath the branches. He said people were finally at peace here. He said ending Christmas would break them. I told him peace built on forgetting was not peace. The tree reacted. Lights flared along its branches, illuminating the hall in harsh white glow. The doors slammed shut. The air grew warm, suffocating. The calendar in my pocket burned hot against my leg. Daniel grabbed my arm, begging me to stop. He said the town needed Christmas. He said the tree was kinder now, gentler. He said maybe this time it was right. I hesitated. That was all it needed. Roots burst through the floor, wrapping around Daniel first. He screamed as memories flooded him. I saw them reflected in his eyes. Christmases stacked endlessly, one perfect moment after another. He begged me to save him. I tried. I pulled at the roots, but they were stronger than before. The tree had learned from the cabin. It knew what to take first. Daniel looked at me one last time and smiled softly. He told me it was warm. Then he was gone. Pulled into the trunk, swallowed whole. The tree pulsed once satisfied. I collapsed to the floor, screaming until my voice broke. When I woke, the doors were open. Snow drifted inside quietly. The tree was gone. The hall was empty. Outside, the town celebrated. I left before dawn, shaking hands, bloody nails torn. I did not look back. I understand now that I cannot save everyone. Hesitation feeds the roots. Mercy gives the tree time. From now on, I will not wait. When I feel Christmas growing where it should end, I will act without warning, without permission, without hope of gratitude, because the tree has learned to take what I love, and next time it will not ask. After Daniel, the world felt sharper, less forgiving. Grief stripped away hesitation and left only clarity. I stopped asking myself if what I was doing was right. I asked only whether it was necessary. The tree did not care about morality. It cared about momentum. I changed my methods. I no longer warned towns. I no longer tried to convince anyone. When I felt the pull, when the air thickened with memory and repetition, I acted quickly and quietly. I learned to read the early signs the way hunters read tracks in snow. A calendar that refused to turn. Music that looped endlessly. People who spoke about Christmas in the present tense. long after it had passed. In Oregon, I found a roadside attraction that promised a permanent Christmas experience. Families paid to walk through fake snow and endless carols. Behind the main building, I felt the hum vibrating through the asphalt. Beneath the attraction, a root system had already taken hold, feeding on thousands of small wishes. I set fire to the place after closing. The flames burned hot and fast. The hum screamed, then vanished. News reports called it arson. No one was hurt. I did not stay to watch the aftermath. In New Jersey, I cut power to an entire block where every house had synchronized lights flashing in perfect rhythm every night. The residents complained that the magic was gone. They never noticed how restless they had been before. Each action made the bells quieter for a while. Each action made the dreams worse. I began to see Daniel everywhere. In reflections, in crowds, in dark windows. He never accused me. That was worse. His silence felt like judgment. I stopped sleeping more than a few hours at a time. When I did sleep, I dreamed of roots breaking through bone, through concrete, through memory itself. I dreamed of a world frozen in endless celebration, unmoving, unchanging, safe and dead. The tree adapted again. It began targeting me. In a town in Idaho, I arrived to find my name written on ornaments hanging from a public tree. No one admitted to putting them there. Children sang a song that used my name instead of traditional lyrics. The calendar in my hotel room showed only one date, December 25th. I smashed it against the wall until my hands bled. That night, Michael appeared again, not as a caretaker, not as a host, as a messenger. He stood at the edge of the streetlights, not smiling, not angry, just tired. He told me the tree understood my role now. He told me resistance had become part of the ritual. Ending Christmas had become another repetition. He said the tree needed an ending that lasted. I asked him what that meant. He said eventually there would be a Christmas that did not end, because there would be no one left to end it. He said the tree was learning patience. Michael warned me that I could not destroy every root, that the only way to truly stop the cycle was to become part of it, to replace the tree with something that could choose to stop. I realized then what he was offering, not surrender, succession. I told him I would rather die. Michael nodded sadly. He said everyone said that at first. The bells rang louder than they had in years. Snow began to fall in thick, heavy sheets out of season. The town glowed brighter than it should have. I fled before dawn, knowing I had crossed another line. I am no longer just fighting Christmas. I am racing it, because the tree is preparing something larger than a town, larger than a cabin, larger than tradition. And if it succeeds, there will be no seasons left to save. By the time the 15th Christmas approached, I understood that speed alone would not save the world. I had been chasing symptoms, cutting branches, burning decorations, shattering rituals wherever I found them. The tree endured. It always did. What Michael had said followed me like a shadow. Resistance had become part of the pattern. The tree did not just survive opposition, it incorporated it. I slowed down. For the first time in years, I stopped traveling. and chose one place to watch instead of many to disrupt. A city large enough to hide changes, small enough to feel them when they happen. I rented a room overlooking a public square that transformed every December into a winter attraction. Ice rink lights, music vendors, everything timed to perfection. I watched the calendar obsessively. December arrived, and nothing felt wrong. The hum stayed distant, barely noticeable. I almost convinced myself I was losing my edge. Then the rink opened. People flooded the square, laughing, skating, holding hands. The music looped endlessly, the same songs in the same order every night. I counted the repetitions. No one else did. They smiled wider with each loop. I began to see the pattern beneath the surface. The tree no longer grew in secret. It grew in systems, schedules, algorithms. It fed on predictability, on comfort built through repetition. The modern world had made it stronger. I followed the maintenance tunnels beneath the square one night. The hum guided me through concrete corridors until I reached a locked service room. Inside stood a generator surrounded by decorations and offerings left by workers who did not remember leaving them. From the floor grew roots, thin and pale, running into the wiring itself. The tree had learned to live inside infrastructure. I realized then that destroying it would no longer be a single act. It would be a process that required a presence, constant, deliberate, and personal. The tree needed someone to say stop every time. Michael returned that night, not as a threat, but as a confirmation. He appeared in the reflection of a dark window, standing beside me, as if we were old colleagues. He said the tree had reached a stage where it needed a counterbalance embedded into the cycle, someone who could end Christmas locally repeatedly without destroying everything around it. He said I had already been doing the work. I asked him what the cost was. He said permanence. If I stayed long enough in one place, if I allowed myself to become part of the seasonal rhythm, I could interrupt it from within. I could make sure Christmas always ended there, even if it continued elsewhere. But I would never truly leave. I would age differently. I would be remembered oddly. I would belong to December. I laughed at that. Then I stopped. Because it sounded familiar. I thought of Michael as a child watching his parents disappear into memory. I thought of Daniel smiling softly as the roots took him. I thought of all the towns that would never know they had been saved. I said yes. The moment I accepted, the bells stopped ringing in the distance. The hum settled low and steady, like a heart finding a new rhythm. The square outside dimmed slightly, as if the lights had been turned down just a notch. That night, December ended on schedule. People went home tired, content, unaware anything had changed. I stayed. Years passed strangely after that. I did not mark them the way others did. I felt December approach like a tide and recede like breath. Each year I intervened quietly. Small actions, subtle disruptions, endings enforced without spectacle. No cabins formed here. No trees grew roots deep enough to feed. Sometimes I catch my reflection in shop windows and do not recognize myself. Sometimes children look at me with familiarity they cannot explain. Sometimes I hear bells and know they are not meant for me. me, I have become what Michael once was, not a caretaker of Christmas, but its ending, and as long as I remain here, the tree will have to look elsewhere. That is the bargain, and I am still holding it. The first year I stayed, nothing terrible happened. That should have frightened me more than screaming roots or collapsing cabins ever did. December arrived quietly. Lights went up on schedule. Music played. People gathered and then dispersed. Christmas ended like it was supposed to. I told myself the bargain was working. By the second year, I noticed the cost. It started with memory, small things at first. The name of a bar I used to visit, the face of a neighbor I had spoken to dozens of times. They slipped away without pain, leaving only the awareness that something was missing. December took more than it gave. People began to recognize me without knowing why. Shop owners nodded as if I were a regular, though I had never been inside. Children waved from across the square, calling me Mr. December, like it was a joke they all shared. I corrected them once. They laughed and forgot the correction immediately. I stopped correcting anyone. When Christmas approached, the hum no longer warned me. It lived inside me now, steady and low. I did not need to search for roots. I felt them stir like muscles preparing to move. When something threatened to linger too long, I acted instinctively, turning off a generator, changing a schedule, misplacing a key moment so that the ritual broke. Christmas ended elsewhere. It did not. I felt those failures too, distant echoes of bells ringing beyond my reach. Sometimes they were loud enough to wake me from sleep. I learned to live with the guilt. The tree was vast. I was not. Michael appeared less often now. When he did, he looked relieved. He told me the system had stabilized, that the tree no longer pushed as hard here, that my presence had become part of the seasonal balance. I asked him what happened when I failed completely. He said then the tree would move back in. That was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. By the 5th year, the square no longer needed heavy decorations. Fewer lights went up. The rink closed earlier. People still enjoyed the season, but something restrained them from holding on too tightly. They went home when it was time. They let January come. I began to fade. Photographs taken of me blurred inexplicably. Security cameras glitched when I passed. Paperwork misplaced my name. I existed most clearly only in December. The rest of the year I was a suggestion. I tried leaving once. I packed a bag and drove until the hum stretched thin. The farther I went, the harder it became to breathe. My chest ached like something essential was being pulled away. I turned back before dawn, shaking. The square welcomed me like I had never left. I understood then that the bargain was complete. I was anchored here not by force, but by function. As long as I stayed, Christmas would end properly. As long as Christmas ended, the tree would not take root here. This was containment. Some nights I walk the square after midnight, once the lights shut off. The snow reflects the moon softly, peaceful, honestly cold. In those moments, I feel something close to contentment. Then December 25th arrives, and I feel the pull again. I do the work. I break the loops. I make sure people say goodbye. And when the last light goes dark and the calendar turns, I feel myself loosen just a little. Still here. still necessary, still paying the price, because somewhere far away bells are ringing again, and one day I may be needed there instead. But until then I remain, the ending, holding. The replacement did not announce itself. It never does. Change like this prefers subtlety because people accept it more easily when they believe it was always there. I felt it before I saw it. A thinning sensation like frostbite moving inward, numbing parts of me I still needed. It began with a stranger. He appeared one December evening, standing near the edge of the square, watching the lights come on. He wore a dark coat and kept his hands in his pockets. At first I thought he was just another visitor, passing through, drawn by the seasonal calm. But when I moved, he moved too, always staying at the same distance. He smiled when our eyes met. I felt the hum shift. This man did not radiate hunger like the tree, or obedience like Michael once had. He radiated readiness. The roots beneath the square stirred in recognition of him, the way muscles respond to familiar movement. The tree was testing a successor. I watched him for days. He did not interfere. He did not disrupt. He observed the patterns, learning where the season bent and where it broke. When Christmas ended on schedule, he looked disappointed. That frightened me. On the fourth night, he approached me directly. He spoke my name without asking. His voice sounded calm, steady, untouched by the fatigue that weighed down every word I spoke these days. He thanked me. He said the square was stable because of my work. He said the tree respected efficiency. He said endings were most powerful when they felt voluntary. I asked him who he was. He said that question would become less important soon. I realized then that this was not an enemy sent to destroy me. It was a mirror sent to replace me. The tree did not need me specifically. It needed a role filled. When one anchor weakened, another would be grown. The cost of containment was not death, it was succession. I tried to drive him away. I altered schedules more aggressively, cut power earlier, disrupted rituals more visibly. People complained. Tension rose. The square felt brittle. The stranger adapted faster than I did. He spoke to shop owners, reassuring them. He organized events that ended cleanly without my intervention. He redirected people gently home before midnight. Christmas still ended. The tree approved. I began to fade faster. Memories unraveled, whole years at a time. I would wake unsure of where I lived, what decade it was, until December grounded me again. The rest of the year became fog. One night I confronted him beneath the unlit tree in the square. I asked him why he was doing this. He said, because he could feel the pull. And unlike me, he did not resist it. He said resistance was inefficient. He said acceptance allowed better control. That was when I understood the final cruelty of the tree. It did not want martyrs forever. It wanted caretakers who believed in the balance, who would choose containment willingly and train the next in turn. I told him he was making a mistake. He smiled and said everyone said that at first. The bells rang faintly, not loudly, not urgently, but with purpose. The square lights flickered, then steadied. I felt something detach inside me, like a knot finally loosening. The stranger stepped closer and placed a hand on the tree trunk. The roots responded instantly, brightening beneath the stone. He closed his eyes and breathed as if settling into a familiar chair. I stepped back dizzy. The calendar in my pocket turned on its own. December 26th. For the first time in years, the date advanced without my effort. Christmas had ended without me. I left the square before dawn, knowing if I stayed, I would disappear completely. Outside the city, the hum stretched thin but did not vanish. I could still hear bells far away calling to him now, not me. I am writing this because I do not know how long I will remain coherent. Each December, I feel less necessary, less solid. The tree no longer looks my way. But if you are reading this and you feel the pull, if you find yourself wanting Christmas to stay just a little longer, understand this. Endings do not disappear. They are replaced, and one day you may be the one the tree decides is ready. I am not sure when I stopped being the main character of this story. That realization came quietly without drama, which somehow made it worse. One December, I woke up and understood that the world no longer needed me in the way it once had. The work was still being done. Christmas was still ending on time. It just was not ending because of me. I drifted. That is the only word that fits. I moved from place to place without urgency, following old instincts that no longer triggered alarms. The hum was faint now, like a memory of pain rather than pain itself. Bells rang sometimes, but they were distant, tuned to another frequency, another listener. I began to notice how people looked at me, not afraid, not curious, uncertain. Clerks hesitated before handing me receipts. Hotel staff forgot my room number seconds after telling me. Security cameras still glitched when I passed. But now no one bothered to review the footage. It was as if the world itself had decided I was not worth resolving. December came and went without incident. That terrified me. I tried to intervene anyway. In a coastal town, I cut power to a holiday display that ran too long. Nothing happened. The lights came back on an hour later, brighter than before, and no roots followed. The tree did not respond. I was obsolete. I dreamed of the square often, not as it was, but as it is now. The stranger stood where I once did, calm, efficient, respected. People trusted him instinctively. When Christmas ended, they thanked him without knowing why. He smiled and accepted their gratitude like a professional. In one dream, I tried to speak to him, but my voice made no sound. He did not turn around. I woke from those dreams feeling hollow. I realized then that the tree was done with me. It had taken what it needed, my resistance, my sacrifice, my years, and moved on. Like all systems, it optimized. That should have been the end, but something else remained. I still remembered. I remembered the cabin, the roots, the people swallowed by celebration. I remembered Daniel. I remembered Michael before he was shaped into something useful. Memory without function is dangerous. It lingers. It questions. The tree did not like questions. The bells returned one night, sharp and close enough to hurt. I followed them, not because I was needed, but because I wanted answers. They led me far from cities into a stretch of forest I did not recognize. Snow fell thick and silent, muffling every step. There was no cabin. There was a clearing. In the center stood a small tree barely taller than I was, decorated modestly with simple lights. It looked fragile, almost harmless. The hum around it was weak, uncertain. This was not a root. It was a seed. I understood immediately. When the tree outgrew a caretaker, it discarded what remained of them, but the remnants were not useless. They became nutrients for something smaller, something new. The seed pulsed softly when I approached, reacting to my presence like recognition. It was not hungry yet. It was waiting. I could leave. If I walked away, nothing would happen. The seed would grow slowly, quietly, until someone else wished hard enough to notice it. The cycle would continue unchanged. Or I could act. I did not have tools anymore. No authority, no role. But I had one thing the tree could never fully remove: choice. I stepped closer and wrapped my hands around the small trunk. It was cold, painfully so. Frost crept instantly across my skin. Images flooded my mind, not of joy, but of endings, goodbyes, doors closing, lights turning off. The seed resisted weakly. I held on until the pain blurred into something distant, until the hum faltered, until the lights went dark one by one. When I released the tree, it crumbled to ash at my feet, carried away by the wind. The bells stopped. I collapsed in the snow, shaking but alive. When I stood again, the forest felt empty in a way that was right. No pressure, no pull, just winter. I do not know what happens to people like me after that. I feel thinner than before, less anchored. But for the first time in years, December feels quiet. If you are listening to this, understand that evil does not always end in fire or triumph. Sometimes it ends because someone who no longer matters chooses to act anyway. That is how Christmas ends. One last time, after the forest went quiet, I expected something to follow me home. For years, silence had always been temporary. The pause before another bell, another hum, another request for intervention. This time nothing came. The absence felt unnatural, like standing on a shoreline after the tide has gone too far out. I walked for hours before reaching a road. A passing truck stopped without hesitation, the driver never asking where I came from or why I was shaking. When he dropped me off in the nearest town, he wished me a Merry Christmas out of habit, then frowned, as if unsure why he had said it at all. It was December 27th. The date mattered more to me than anything he could have said. I stayed in that town for weeks, watching for signs. No decorations lingered past their time. No music looped endlessly. Calendars turned when they were supposed to. People argued about New Year plans, complained about winter, and went back to work. Life resumed, and yet something inside me did not. I felt hollow in a new way, not like grief, but like completion. The constant vigilance that had defined me for so long had nowhere to go. Without the hum, my thoughts felt louder, sharper. I noticed things I had ignored for years. The sound of my own breathing, the weight of my body, the passage of ordinary time. I tried to leave the region. This time my chest did not tighten. My breath stayed steady. I crossed state lines without pain. The anchor was gone. I realized then what destroying the seed had done. It had not just ended a future cycle. It had released me from the last function, tying me to the tree. I was not a caretaker anymore. I was just a person. That terrified me more than any supernatural threat ever had. I began searching for remnants, not roots, not trees, but people like me, people who remembered. There were fewer than I expected. Most had faded into normal lives once the pressure lifted. A few carried scars they could not name. I met a woman in Vermont who said Christmas always made her uneasy, but she could never explain why. I met a man in Ohio who refused to put up decorations because he said endings mattered. None of them had heard bells. None of them dreamed of trees. The system was broken. That did not mean it was gone forever. I still watch the world each December. I no longer intervene. I observe. I wait. If something begins again, I want to see how it forms without my interference. I want to know if the tree learned restraint, or if it simply lost its strongest branch. Sometimes I think I see Michael in crowds, older now, more human, less certain. Other times I think I see Daniel in reflections, smiling sadly. I do not approach them. Some things are better left unconfirmed. On the night of December 31st, I stood outside watching fireworks burst against the sky. People counted down together, laughing, cheering, embracing the future. No bells rang, no lights flickered. When the clock struck midnight, time moved forward. I cried then, not from sadness but relief. For the first time since the cabin, I believed the ending might hold. Still, I keep this record because stories like this survive by being forgotten. People dismiss them as coincidences, folklore, exaggeration. That is how cycles begin again, quietly, unnoticed. If you ever find yourself wishing the holidays would never end, pay attention to that feeling. Ask yourself why you need time to stop. Ask what you are afraid of losing when it moves on. Because something out there is always listening, and it remembers how close it once came. If Christmas ever lingers again, you will not see a cabin at first. You will see comfort, routine, warmth, and by the time you realize it has stopped being a season, it may already be a place. Endings only survive when we choose them. That is the last thing the tree ever taught me. I told myself the story was finished. That is the lie everyone tells when a danger becomes quiet. Silence feels like safety when you are tired enough. For a long time, nothing challenged that belief. Years passed. Seasons moved the way they were supposed to. Christmas arrived and left like a polite guest who understood boundaries. Then one winter I received a letter. It was handwritten on thick paper, scented faintly with pine. No return address, no stamp. It was waiting on my kitchen table when I came home from work, as if it had always been there. I did not open it at first. I stood staring at my own name, written in careful, familiar ink. I knew before I read it. The letter thanked me. It said the world had enjoyed a long, quiet stretch because of my choices. It said endings had held. because someone once believed they mattered more than comfort. The handwriting was steady, gentle, unmistakable. Michael, he wrote that he was older now, truly aging in ways the tree had never allowed before. He said that whatever balance had existed was shifting again, not violently, not urgently, but inevitably. Time had a way of eroding even the strongest lessons. He wrote one final warning: be careful what people teach their children about Christmas. I spent weeks thinking about that sentence. I noticed it everywhere after that. School plays that framed Christmas as the only moment of kindness. Advertisements that promised happiness if the season never stopped. Parents who spoke about December as an escape from the rest of the year instead of part of it. The tree did not need roots anymore. It had ideas. One evening, I attended a community event out of curiosity. Children gathered in a park around a large artificial tree. Each was given a small card and asked to write what they wished Christmas could be like forever. The cards were tied to the branches, smiling adults clapping approvingly. I felt something stir, not a hum, a whisper. I watched the cards flutter in the cold air, words like always, happy no school mommy. Never sad, stay forever, written in uneven letters. The tree did not glow. It did not ring bells. It did not need to. That night I dreamed of a forest made entirely of decorations, plastic branches, endless lights stretching farther than I could see. No single trunk, no single heart. Just repetition without source. I woke knowing the truth. The tree was no longer a thing that could be burned, cut, or held. It had become a story passed gently from one generation to the next. A belief that endings were failures. That stopping was the same as losing. I understood then why the cabin had been so effective. It did not trap people with fear. It trapped them with relief. I cannot fight that the way I once did. So I do something smaller. I tell stories. I tell children that Christmas is special because it ends. I tell adults that warmth matters because it is temporary. I tell anyone who will listen that joy without an ending stops being joy at all. Sometimes they laugh, sometimes they listen. Every December I wait to see if bells will ring. They rarely do now. When they do, they are faint, easily drowned out by ordinary noise. That is how it survives now, not as a monster, as a preference. If you have listened this far, understand that this is not a warning about trees or cabins or supernatural forces hiding in the woods. It is a warning about comfort taken too far, about refusing to let time move because change hurts. Nothing terrible happens all at once. It happens slowly, politely, beautifully. One extra day, one repeated song, one wish whispered too often. If you ever find yourself hoping Christmas would never end, pause and ask why. Ask what you are trying not to face when January arrives, because somewhere something is still paying attention, and it remembers every story we tell it. This one ends here. That is why it matters. The story ends here. Thank you for watching and listening to the whole story. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to listen to the next stories.